Hello all, this is Jelim and this is Storytime episode 15, which is chapter 11 of The Blood King. If you haven't been with me for the previous chapters, then please head on back to Storytime episode 4 and start from there. Without further ado, here we go. Chapter 11. The others left in Peter's car a few hours later while Janice stayed rooted to the kitchen floor. It seemed that she wasn't leaving without answers. Kelsey jumped up onto the counter, unwrapping a lollipop without ceremony and sticking it into her mouth. She then offered one to Janice, who simply glared over it at Kelsey. Lawrence and Dimitri joined them, sensing the inevitable had happened. Kelsey would get an earful later if they didn't give it to her now. "Start talking," demanded Janice. "What the hell was that?" Kelsey sighed as her brothers joined in with glaring at her. Yet again, her best intentions had been thrown out the window. "I don't know where to start," Kelsey shrugged honestly. "All right, I'll go," said Dimitri. "Lawrence and I are 400-year-old vampires, and Kelsey here is our little sister, also over 400 years old, who is an empathic witch." With a quick glance at Janice's emotional aura, Kelsey could see she was partly terrified, a sort of colourless transparent cloud, shocked, a vibrant blue, and sceptical, a dark brown. Terror, true terror, was the only emotion that Kelsey had ever seen as colourless. Many empathic witches had theorised as to why, and most believed it to be a subconscious defence mechanism, that if an emotion was incapable of being seen, then the individual had a better chance of survival. Kelsey preferred to think of it as the body deciding between life and death. Can I struggle through this, or should I give up now? Kelsey, of course, without consulting with anyone, had unanimously decided that Janice's terror would be of the former kind. Don't worry, they're well provided for by blood donations. They won't hunt unless they're in dire need of blood, and you're currently a guest, so they won't hurt you, Kelsey stated, attempting to rescue the situation as she turned to glare upon Dimitri, who had so insensitively begun this discussion. 400 years. Janice trailed off as she turned to Kelsey. "Do you seriously expect me to believe that you're the original Frey siblings?" Kelsey shrugged, hopping down from the countertop. "Believe it or not, that's your decision. Though, as an awakened witch, life will be a whole lot easier for you if you do believe it." "I'm a witch?" asked Janice. "You felt the power in the words carved on the doorways. You saw Lunara when everyone else did not. Granted, he did make you see him, but the others couldn't. That means you've got magic in your blood, and a powerful bloodline at that. I've encountered your ancestors before, but I don't know exactly where," Kelsey explained. Janice held up a hand. "You're going way too fast there. I'm still stuck on the fact that the three of you are over 400 years old. The agelessness becomes noticeable after a while, so we tend to move around a lot," Kelsey stated. "This is the first time we've been together in this house for a good 63-ish years, added Lawrence. "And the only reason Kelsey is here is because the local witch coven is up to no good again." "Coven?" asked Janice. "A group of witches. This particular coven is called Capricorn," Kelsey stated. "It began in the time of the ancient Greeks. They moved over to the Americas with the Spanish settlers in the mid-16th century, but obviously didn't stick around with them as they desired a land of their own where they were free to do as they pleased. That only lasted about a century before the British started moving in, but the coven stuck around. Our family was originally a part of it until they decided they wanted to sacrifice Dimitri and Lawrence for a spell called the Binding. But Blue Valley wasn't settled until 1716, Janice stated. "What do you think happened when the British found a group of witches in the middle of nowhere?" asked Kelsey with a shrug. "The witches made them think they'd settled the land." "What?" asked Janice as she turned to Dimitri and Lawrence. "I think we're explaining this backwards," said Lawrence. "You're right," agreed Kelsey. "Come on." She stood and headed back to the library. Running her fingers over the books, she took one from its place on the shelf and put it on a nearby desk, flipping through the pages until she reached the page she wanted. "This book is called the Covenant Compendium," Kelsey explained. Within its pages is the detailed history of Covenant law and order, as well as basic origins of covens and where they are today, and finally, a basic understanding of magic. For instance, Capricorn arose when the constellations were still a large part of which law. It's not anymore? Asked Janice. No, their power these days is drawn from ancestral and elemental magics, explained Kelsey. The celestial practices are old and far more dangerous. Prior to the witch burnings in Europe, the coven moved to America and set down roots in Blue Valley, intending it to be a peaceful town for their kind. Our mother moved out with them and met our father, who was a passing traveller who settled down into her life and ways. The thing you have to know about witches is that they are most commonly female. Male witches are rare and, according to superstition, a sign of great prosperity for a coven. Lawrence and Dimitri being born was an incredible achievement for Capricorn, and they planned to take advantage of it. As I mentioned before, covens, well, any witches really, draw on ancestral magic, but this is limited by what the dimensions of life and death allow. The binding is a spell designed to collapse the barrier between life and death, and therefore allow direct contact with the ancestors and their power. And they needed to sacrifice Lawrence and Dimitri for that, confirmed Janice. Kelsey nodded. Witch law perceives male witches as pure beings, and purities are imperative to lower the barrier. But our mother would not let them sacrifice her sons. She knew the ancestors and the coven were greedy and power-hungry, that they would commit awful crimes once given access to such power. So she devised a plan to prevent them from ever taking her sons. She turned them into vampires, Janice concluded. Kelsey nodded. My mother and I were different to the rest of the coven. We are empathic witches, meaning we draw our power from emotions rather from the elemental forces of nature. We are also very rare, and because of this we live for far longer than the average witch. Our deaths are believed to bring war or peace to those affected. Our murder brings eternal torment to the culprit. These superstitions are largely the only thing that has kept me alive these past 400 years. The coven wishes to exact revenge on Dimitri and Lawrence, but with me protecting them, they fail to do so continuously. That's why you're here then? You're protecting your brothers? Asked Janice. Kelsey nodded. Family is everything to those who live for so long. I don't plan on losing them anytime soon. Only problem is that the coven is now spreading the word that they are once again capable of enacting the binding, said Lawrence. And so far we've had Vincent Lorenzo, the oldest vampire in existence, move in across town, and a few of his side along with them. In addition to that, I caught a whiff of a hunter on the loose in town. A hunter? Kelsey stated curiously, as if this didn't faze her nearly as much as the rest of the formidable beings she was clearly up against. So basically, it's a few hundred against you three, asked Janice. Basically, Kelsey nodded in confirmation. But that still doesn't explain why you think I'm a witch, said Janice. Dimitri and Lawrence turned to Kelsey expectantly. I've been to Blue Valley many times over the centuries. It is our birthplace and holds great meaning to all of us. Both here and elsewhere I have encountered many witches, both young and old. And your magical energy reminds me of someone I met, I think, around half a century ago, though I can't recall exactly who or where. I'll let you know if I ever work it out. The important thing now is that you acknowledge the fact that you are a witch. I don't know how or when you awakened, but you are quite strong, and untrained you can cause a lot of unintended damage if you were to fall into any danger. The cat seemed to think you approaching me was inevitable, Janice said, crossing her arms. That sounds crazy. How does the cat even talk? Lunara is my familiar, Kelsey sighed in annoyance. Familiars are like extensions of a witch's soul, kindred spirits. He's a pain in the ass most of the time, but he is mine. Whoa, hold up, Dimitri stood hurriedly. You have a familiar? When the hell did that happen? Kelsey shrugged. 300 years ago, give or take. He comes and goes as he pleases, so it's not like he's around all the time. Why would you not tell us about that? Asked Dimitri. Like I said, he's a pain in the ass. He purposely didn't show himself to you just so you'd think I was crazy if I ever brought it up, Kelsey snapped. If I'm a witch, do I have a familiar? Asked Janice. Somewhere, Kelsey said. You'll meet it someday, but I can't tell you exactly when. It'll happen when it happens. Dimitri sighed and turned to Lawrence for support. Lawrence just shrugged, seemingly unaffected by this new information. We can't tell any covens anyway, even to brag about it. If they knew Kelsey had a familiar, they'd hunt it. That still doesn't explain why it chose to show itself to a stranger of all people, Dimitri reasoned. She may have witch blood in her veins, but that doesn't automatically make her an ally. Kelsey frowned. I do admit it was brash of him, but Lunaro wouldn't reveal himself to someone he couldn't trust, even for his own entertainment. If I'm a witch, can I do magic? Asked Janice, surprised. Kelsey turned to her and nodded while Dimitri scoffed in amusement. Is the Pope Catholic? Well, I don't know any spells, Janice frowned in annoyance. I'm not trained or anything. Yes, well, in your case, that could be a good thing, Kelsey replied. Because to be trained, you'd usually learn from the local coven, and that coven is Capricorn, and their methods are questionable. So do I have to learn? Asked Janice. Kelsey shrugged. Probably a good idea if you don't want to accidentally put a new crater on the map. Janice was silent as she looked at the pages of the Covenant Compendium, running her fingers over the words. She flinched back slightly when she felt the magic pull her in. It's all right, Kelsey said. What you're feeling is normal for a witch. These books are written especially so that the words are quite literally felt by the reader. If you concentrate on the pages, the words will come to you as your fingers touch them, like bubbles rising to the surface of a lake. Janice seemed to take in Kelsey's words before she ran her fingers over the words hesitantly. Hear ye all who see the third, heed the words you read. The time has come to breach the wall, let the covenant law be freed. Read Janice. Then she took her hand away from the words. What does it mean? It's debatable. Most think it's some sort of chant to awaken dormant powers, but fanatics tend to believe it refers to the binding. Witches have been trying to enact it for a millennium, stated Kelsey. With the barrier collapsed between life and death, there will no longer be a need for mortal rules that keep the elemental balance in check. Unlimited power for eternity. That is what the Coven is trying to access, and what my mother died trying to stop. I don't intend for her sacrifice to be in vain. Janice observed Kelsey's determination as she closed the book, hesitating before she spoke. My mother died when I was very young. My father left as soon as I turned 18. I've got no one that I know who is blood related to me. Perhaps it wasn't a mere fluke that Lunaro chose to show himself to me. Kelsey smiled in amusement. Fate is a tricky thing, not always fixed, but always ending in the way it should. Considering you seem to have been ignored by Capricorn and left to fend for yourself, I'm willing to teach you. But you must understand that witchcraft cannot be taken lightly. It can be dangerous, and everything has its consequences, especially for elemental witches who seek to keep the balance. Janice sighed. I'm sorry, but this is a lot to take in. It's fine. If you have any questions, come by and ask, Kelsey offered. This house is a place where none of us have to hide. Janice looked one last time at the compendium before moving for the door. I suppose I'll see you soon then. Have a good night, Janice, stated Kelsey. Janice nodded before leaving the house. The door closed behind her quietly, and Kelsey turned to her brothers, who were frowning at her with annoyance. What? Asked Kelsey. Don't you what us? Said Dimitri. You insisted no one would find out this time. I can hardly stop her from seeing Lunaro if that dumb cat feels the need to show himself for once, said Kelsey. I know you guys never had familiars, but despite whatever attitude they may manifest with, they know a good thing when they see it. You should have been more careful, Calcinia, scolded Lawrence. Kelsey sighed, not in the mood to be lectured. I'm going to bed. Don't bother me until morning. Kelsey left the room, muttering to herself about her brother's clear disappointment in her ability to predict the future. Lawrence sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. That could have gone better. The hunter? Inquired Dimitri. Female, replied Lawrence. Young but skilled. Smelled like Veritos. It was weird though. There was something about her that wasn't like the other hunters we've encountered over the years. What do you mean? I mean, I don't think she's association trained, Lawrence replied. I didn't think there were any hunters outside of the association, Dimitri mused. Yes, well, regardless of where her origins lie, we'll have to be cautious if she's indeed trying to kill us, Lawrence stated. If, asked Dimitri as he left the room, we're the vampires on everyone else's hit list. I'm sure we've made hers too. Charming, stated Lawrence. I'll remember that. Well, that was the end of chapter 11. A good bit of background information in that one, so I hope that clarifies a few things from the world's lore. I will see you guys next time. Stay happy and healthy. Bye.